My CEO, the man I once called a friend, fired me in his glass-walled office an hour before the most important board meeting of my life. He thought he had silenced me and cleared his path to destroy my father's company. He was wrong. He forgot about one unbreakable clause in the company bylaws, a secret weapon my father had left just for me. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The words hung in the air, sterile and sharp, like the minimalist decor of Marcus Thorne's corner office. Your services are no longer required, Madison. I stared at him, my mind struggling to connect the phrase to my reality. For 25 years, my services had been not just required, but foundational. I was the chief operating officer of Vance Innovations, the company my father, Robert Vance, had poured his life into. I had started in the mailroom, worked my way through every department, and earned my seat at the table through sweat and sacrifice, not nepotism. Marcus knew that. He had been my father's protégé, the man who had stood beside me at the funeral and promised to protect his legacy. "Marcus, what are you talking about?" I asked, my voice a strained whisper. My hands felt cold, and a strange, buzzing sensation started behind my ears. "The board meeting is in an hour. We're voting on the Axion merger." He gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a politician's smile, practiced, polished, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Precisely. And as a former employee, you will no longer have a reason to attend. Security will escort you from the building. Please be cooperative." He gestured to the two guards standing impassively by the door. Their presence hadn't registered until that moment. They weren't our usual friendly security staff. These were stony-faced contractors, hired for a specific, unpleasant purpose. My purpose. The file in my hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy. It contained everything: the months of sleepless nights, the off-the-books investigation, the proof. It was a meticulous record of Marcus's deceit, detailing how the Axion merger wasn't a partnership, but a hostile takeover in disguise. He had structured a deal that would pay him a fortune in personal bonuses, while allowing Axion to dismantle our research and development divisions, lay off nearly 60% of our staff, and sell our patents for parts. He was selling the soul of the company for his own golden parachute. I had found the final piece of evidence late last night, a money trail leading to an offshore account Marcus had opened just 3 weeks ago. Axion had already made a good faith deposit. It wasn't a merger, it was a bribe. "You can't do this," I said, my voice finding a sliver of strength. "I know what you're planning, Marcus. I have proof." He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Proof? Madison, you look unwell. You've been under a lot of stress lately. Perhaps this is for the best. A long vacation. Your final severance package is quite generous." He slid a thick envelope across the vast expanse of his mahogany desk. It landed with a soft, final thud. The condescension in his tone was like a physical blow. He was painting me as unstable, a woman cracking under pressure. It was a classic, disgusting tactic. He was erasing me from the narrative, turning my righteous anger into a symptom of hysteria. The guards took a step forward. My time was up. I clutched my briefcase, the incriminating file safely inside. My mind was a whirlwind of panic and fury. He was going to get away with it. In 1 hour, the board, charmed by his silver-tongued presentations and blinded by the impressive, fabricated profit projections, would vote yes. My father's life's work would be auctioned off to the highest bidder, and the lives of hundreds of loyal employees would be shattered. As the guards gently but firmly took my arms, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The world tilted, the floor-to-ceiling windows showing a distorted view of the city skyline. Marcus just stood there, watching, his face a mask of smug victory. He had outmaneuvered me. He had stripped me of my position, my voice, my ability to fight back. In his mind, the game was already over. He had won. They led me through the executive suite, past the confused and worried faces of my team. No one dared to meet my eye. Fear and uncertainty were already spreading through the floor like a contagion. As I was walked into the elevator, my reflection stared back at me, a pale, defeated woman. Marcus had taken everything from me. The betrayal was worse than the firing itself. The elevator doors slid shut with a quiet whoosh, encasing me in a mirrored box that reflected my shock a dozen times over. The descent from the 40th floor felt like a fall from grace. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from a rage so profound it was almost silent. One of the guards cleared his throat, a small, awkward sound in the heavy silence. "Your personal items will be boxed up and sent to your home, Ms. Vance," he said, reciting a line he had likely delivered many times before. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was replaying Marcus's smirk, the cold finality in his eyes. He had been planning this for months, maybe even years. Every friendly conversation, every shared coffee, every time he had called me, the heart of this company, had been a lie. He was a predator who had patiently waited for the perfect moment to strike. When the elevator doors opened to the lobby, the afternoon sun streamed through the grand glass entrance, momentarily blinding me. The second guard gestured towards the revolving doors. "This way, please." I walked out onto the bustling sidewalk, a ghost in my own life. The sounds of the city, the traffic, the distant sirens, the chatter of pedestrians, felt alien and distant. Just minutes ago, I had been the COO of a billion-dollar tech firm. Now, I was just a woman standing on a street corner, clutching a briefcase that held a truth no one would ever hear. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my fingers clumsy. It was a text from Sarah, my executive assistant, a bright young woman I had mentored for the past 5 years. "They're locking you out of the system. Your email, everything. What's happening, Madison? People are panicking." I typed a quick reply, my thumb shaking. "I've been let go. Don't worry, focus on your work." It was a lie, of course. She should worry. They should all worry. But what could I say? The CEO is a corporate pirate about to sink the ship, and he just threw me overboard. Another notification popped up. An official email from HR, cold and impersonal, confirming the termination of my employment, effective immediately. My access was gone. My voice was gone. I began walking with no destination in mind. My thoughts spiraled. How could the board be so blind? Marcus was charismatic, yes. He spoke the language of profit and growth that investors love to hear. But my father had always said, never trust a man who shines brighter than his ideas. Marcus was all shine, no substance. He had adopted my father's vision, using his words and anecdotes about integrity and innovation, but he had none of his own. He was a hollow man, and a hollow man will always seek to fill himself with the easiest thing to acquire: money. My phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed James Reed. Hope, fragile and faint, flickered within me. James was the lead independent director on the board, a shrewd, quiet man who had been my father's closest friend and confidant. If anyone would listen, it would be him. "Madison?" His voice was gruff, laced with concern. "What is this I'm hearing? Marcus's office sent out a memo saying you've taken an immediate and indefinite leave of absence for personal reasons." "He fired me, James," I said, my voice cracking. "He fired me 10 minutes ago. He's cleaning the board before the vote." There was a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. I knew it. I had a bad feeling about this Axion deal. It felt too rushed, too slick. His numbers don't add up under scrutiny. "They're not just wrong, they're fraudulent," I said, desperation creeping into my tone. "I have the proof, James. Wire transfers, hidden agreements. He's selling us out." "Can you get it to me? The meeting starts in less than an hour. If you can email." "He's locked me out," I interrupted. "My credentials, my email, my access to the servers. It's all gone. I'm standing on the street." A long pause followed. I could hear the muffled sounds of his office in the background. The weight of defeat pressed down on me. I had the weapon, but I was locked outside the fortress walls. "This is bad, Madison," James said finally, his voice grim. Without you in that room, without a formal position, presenting this information will be nearly impossible. Marcus will paint you as a disgruntled employee. He'll bury it in legal procedure." He was right. It was Marcus's word against mine, and I was now officially a nobody. My gaze drifted across the street to the towering glass skyscraper that housed Vance Innovations. My father's name was etched in chrome above the entrance. He had built this company on a handshake and a dream, a promise to create technology that would help people, not just make a profit. And Marcus was turning it into a monument to his own greed. A cold fury began to replace my panic. It started in my gut and spread through my veins, sharpening my focus. Marcus thought he had taken everything. He had taken my job, my access, my voice on the board. He had even tried to take my dignity. He had planned his attack with meticulous, ruthless precision, but they had forgotten one crucial thing. My father, Robert Vance, was a brilliant engineer but a deeply cautious man. He'd seen enough corporate backstabbing in his early career to know that a handshake and good intentions weren't enough to protect a legacy. He built Vance Innovations with a partner, but it was his vision, his patents, and his relentless drive that had turned it from a garage startup into an industry leader. He loved this company as if it were his child. When he passed away 5 years ago, he left me his shares, but more importantly, he left me his wisdom. I remembered sitting with him in his study a few months before he died. He was already frail, but his mind was as sharp as ever. He had a stack of legal documents in front of him. "Madison," he'd said, his voice thin but firm, "this company is your birthright, but a birthright is only as strong as its defenses." He explained the structure of the family trust he had created. It wasn't just a standard financial instrument. He had worked with his lawyers to weave a special clause directly into the company's founding bylaws, a legacy provision. This provision tied his block of shares, the largest single holding in the company, directly to the company's ethical charter. It stipulated that his heir, as trustee, held an absolute and non-transferable right to veto any merger, acquisition, or sale that threatened the core principles upon which the company was founded. It was an emergency brake, a failsafe against the very kind of corporate raiding Marcus was attempting. "No CEO, no board can override it," my father had explained. "It's my ghost in the machine." At the time, with Marcus at the helm and the company thriving, it seemed like an overly paranoid measure. Marcus had been my father's hand-picked successor. He was charming, eloquent, and had a dazzling resume. He had mourned my father with a theatricality that, in hindsight, should have been a red flag. He gave a moving eulogy, speaking of my father's integrity and vision, all while planning to dismantle it. Marcus Thorne was a master of appearances. He wore impeccably tailored suits, had a handshake that was both firm and warm, and possessed an uncanny ability to remember the names of everyone's spouses and children. He was the perfect modern CEO, a darling of the business magazines. But beneath the polished veneer was a chilling emptiness. He saw people not as colleagues, but as assets or obstacles. I recalled a conversation a year ago during our annual review. We were discussing a new community outreach program I had initiated, which provided tech education to underserved high schools. "It's a wonderful gesture, Madison," Marcus had said, his smile never wavering. "But what's the ROI? How does this translate to shareholder value?" "The value is in building a better community, Marcus," I had replied, taken aback. "It's about investing in the next generation. It's what Dad would have wanted." He had tilted his head, his expression unreadable. Robert was a great man, but he was a bit of an idealist. In today's market, idealism is a liability. That was the moment the first real crack appeared in my trust. His interest wasn't in the company's health, but in its valuation. He saw Vance Innovations not as a living entity, a community of brilliant minds, but as a stock ticker symbol. His ambition was a cancer, and I had been too blind, too trusting, to see how far it had metastasized. He started by slowly pushing out the old guard, the executives who had been loyal to my father. He replaced them with his own people, ambitious sycophants who saw him as their ticket to the top. He started focusing on short-term gains, cutting R&D funding for long-term projects in favor of ventures that would provide a quick, flashy boost to the quarterly reports. The Axion merger was the final move in his chess game. He had presented it to the board as a strategic alliance, a partnership that would create an industry titan. He used buzzwords like synergy and optimization, beautiful wrapping paper on an empty box. He knew the board was hungry for a big win, and he served them a feast of lies. I had sacrificed so much for this company. I had missed school plays, postponed vacations, and poured my heart and soul into its operations. I did it not just for my father, but for the thousands of employees who depended on us, who believed in what we were doing. Vance Innovations was more than a business. It was a family. And Marcus was a viper in the nest. Standing on that cold pavement, the full weight of my father's foresight settled upon me. The trust, the legacy provision. It wasn't a dusty legal document anymore. It was a sword. Marcus had stripped me of my title as COO, but he couldn't strip me of my name. He couldn't take away the one role that now mattered most. I was Robert Vance's daughter, and he had made a colossal mistake. He had fired the one person who had the power to stop him, believing that in doing so, he had disarmed me. He had forgotten that my true power didn't come from a title on a business card. It came from my father's legacy, and it was ironclad. The shock finally gave way to a cold, clear resolve. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. The board meeting was starting in less than an hour. Marcus was in that room, charming the directors, sealing the fate of my father's company. I needed a plan, and I needed it now. I ducked into a quiet coffee shop, the smell of roasted beans a strangely comforting anchor in the chaos of my thoughts. I ordered a black coffee I had no intention of drinking and found a small table in the corner. Pulling out my laptop, I bypassed the corporate network I was now barred from and used my personal hotspot. My first move wasn't to fight Marcus as a disgruntled employee, but to assert my power as the company's most significant shareholder. The trust documents were stored in a secure digital vault, one my father and I had set up with his personal attorney years ago. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my muscle memory a testament to the countless hours I'd spent working. Within minutes, I had the full document displayed on my screen. The Robert Vance Family Trust and Legacy Mandate. I scrolled down to Article IV, Section 3, the legacy provision. It was all there, in dense but unequivocal legal language. The trustee, me, had the sole and absolute authority to nullify any corporate resolution proposing the merger, sale, or acquisition of Vance Innovations, should such an action be deemed detrimental to the company's founding principles of innovation, integrity, and employee welfare. The key was the phrase sole and absolute. It was unilateral. It didn't require a board vote or a shareholder consensus. It was a trump card designed for exactly this kind of emergency. My next call was to James Reed. "James," I said, my voice steady now, infused with a newfound confidence. "I'm sending you a document. It's my father's trust mandate. I need you to read Article IV, Section 3, immediately." I emailed him the encrypted file. A few moments of silence passed on the line. I could picture him, a man who rarely showed emotion, his brow furrowed as he read. "My word," he breathed. "Robert, you clever old fox, he never told me the specifics of this. He just said he had safeguards in place." "It's ironclad, isn't it?" "Ironclad doesn't even begin to describe it, Madison," James replied, a hint of excitement in his voice. "This isn't just a provision, it's a constitutional amendment for the company. The bylaws reference this trust explicitly. Marcus can't ignore it." "He doesn't know about it," I said. "Or if he does, he's forgotten. He sees me as Madison Vance, the COO he just fired. He's forgotten I'm also Madison Vance, the executor of my father's will." "So what's the plan?" James asked. "Do we send this to the board's legal counsel right now? Stop the meeting before it starts?" I paused, considering the options. Sending it now would give Marcus time to prepare. He would try to bog it down in legal challenges, create confusion, and twist the narrative. A quiet, procedural victory wasn't enough. What he had done was a public betrayal. His downfall needed to be just as public. He needed to be exposed, not just defeated. "No," I said firmly. "We let the meeting proceed. Let him have his moment. Let him think he's won. I want him to stand up there and sell his lies to the entire board. I want every director to be on record with their support for his fraudulent deal." James was silent for a moment, then let out a low whistle. "You're going to walk into the lion's den." "He threw me out the front door," I said, a grim smile touching my lips. "I'm going to come back through the boardroom wall. I'm on my way back to the office now. Can you meet me in the lobby in 30 minutes? "They won't let you pass security, Madison." "They won't have a choice. As of this moment, I am not acting as an employee. I am acting as the representative of the largest single shareholder block, and I am formally requesting an audience with the board. According to the bylaws, they cannot deny me access." My final step was a call to my father's old lawyer, a shrewd man named Samuel Bennett who had helped draft the trust. I explained the situation in clipped, efficient terms. "He fired you?" Samuel's voice was sharp with indignation. "The arrogance of that man. Madison, your father's provision is unassailable. I have all the original signed documents here in my office. I will personally deliver them to the Vance Tower and serve as your legal counsel in that room." "Thank you, Samuel," I said, relief washing over me. "Things are about to get very difficult for Marcus Thorne." I closed my laptop and stood up, leaving the untouched coffee on the table. My briefcase felt lighter now, no longer a burden of proof but an arsenal. The initial shock and despair had been burned away, replaced by the cold fire of righteous anger. Marcus had intended to humiliate me, to cast me out. He didn't realize. He had just set me free. He had unbound me from the rules of corporate etiquette and the constraints of my position. He thought he was fighting an employee. He was about to find out he was fighting a legacy. Walking back into the lobby of Vance Innovations was a surreal experience. Less than an hour ago, I had been escorted out in disgrace. Now, I returned with a singular, unshakable purpose. The security guards at the front desk, the same ones who had stood by impassively before, stiffened as I approached. One of them, a man named Henderson, stepped forward, his expression a mixture of pity and professional duty. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but you know I can't let you up," he said, blocking my path to the executive elevators. I didn't argue. I simply looked him in the eye and said, "Henderson, please inform Marcus Thorne and the board of directors that Madison Vance, acting as trustee for the Robert Vance Family Trust, is in the lobby and is formally invoking her right under Article VII of the corporate bylaws to address the board." The guard blinked, confusion warring with protocol. He had been given an order to keep Ms. Vance, the former COO, out. He had no instructions regarding Ms. Vance, the powerful shareholder. He stammered for a moment before speaking into his risk communicator. While he was occupied, James Reed emerged from an elevator. He strode over to me, his face set with determination. "They've just started the presentation," he said in a low voice. "Marcus is laying on the charm thick. You should hear the nonsense he's spouting about a new era of prosperity." "Let him," I said calmly. "The higher he builds his pedestal, the further he'll have to fall." A few minutes later, the head of security, a man personally hired by Marcus, came down. He looked flustered. "Ms. Vance, this is highly irregular." "Betraying my father's legacy is highly irregular," I countered coolly. "Firing the COO right before a merger vote is highly irregular. I am simply following the company's bylaws. Are you going to deny me my legal right to address the board?" He knew he was cornered. Denying access to a major shareholder was a lawsuit waiting to happen. With a curt, frustrated nod, he gestured for me to follow. James and I rode the elevator up in silence, the tension so thick it felt like a physical presence. As we stepped out onto the 40th floor, I could hear Marcus's voice booming from the boardroom, muffled by the heavy oak doors. "And so, With the acquisition of Axion's market share, our projections show a 200% increase in profitability within 3 years. This is not just a merger. It is a transformation. I paused outside the door, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. The room fell silent. Every head turned towards me. There were 12 board members sitting around the long, polished table. At the head of it stood Marcus, his presentation frozen on the massive screen behind him. His face, which had been animated with triumphant enthusiasm, went through a rapid series of microexpressions: shock, confusion, and then a flash of pure, unadulterated fury. He had thought he'd disposed of me. My presence was an impossibility he couldn't process. "Madison," he said, his voice dangerously low, his charismatic mask slipping to reveal the venom beneath. "You are trespassing. Security." "They let me in, Marcus," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even me. I walked steadily towards the table, my heels clicking on the marble floor. James took his seat, leaving an empty chair beside him, which I pointedly ignored. I would not be sitting. "Board members," I said, my gaze sweeping across their stunned faces. "I apologize for the interruption. My name is Madison Vance. While I am no longer this company's COO, a position I was relieved of an hour ago, I am here today in a different capacity. I am here as the trustee of my father's estate, which, as you know, represents the largest single block of shares in this company." Marcus's face was turning a blotchy red. "This is a private meeting. You have no standing here." "On the contrary," I replied smoothly, "I have more standing than anyone. I have the standing of the man who built this company, and he was very specific about how to handle situations like this." I placed my briefcase on the table and clicked it open. I took out a single, bound document. It was a copy of the trust mandate. I slid it across the table to the board's lead counsel, a woman named Helen. "Helen, please turn to Article IV, Section 3. You'll find it's a fascinating piece of legal work. It's called the legacy provision." As she began to read, her eyes widening with every line, I turned my attention back to Marcus. "You stand there and talk about profitability and transformation. I have a different set of words for this deal: fraud, theft, and betrayal. You are not merging with Axion. You are selling Vance Innovations for parts to line your own pockets. These are baseless and slanderous accusations," Marcus roared, his composure completely shattered. He was losing control, and everyone could see it. "You're a bitter, fired employee trying to sabotage a deal that will make this company stronger than ever." His poorly executed threats were my opening. "Am I? In my briefcase, I have copies of wire transfers from an Axion subsidiary to a private offshore account you opened 3 weeks ago. Is that part of the synergy you were describing? I have your encrypted emails with Axion's CEO, outlining the plan to dissolve our R&D department and sell off our patents my father developed. Is that the transformation we can all look forward to?" A wave of murmurs swept through the room. The board members were looking from me to Marcus, their expressions shifting from confusion to suspicion and alarm. Marcus was sputtering, his face pale. His lies were obvious now, his blustering a clear sign of guilt. He had been so sure of his victory that he had no defense prepared. He had forgotten the first rule of battle: never underestimate your enemy. And he had certainly never imagined that the woman he dismissed as a sentimental fool was, in fact, the one person holding all the cards. The boardroom was a tinderbox of tension. Helen, the legal counsel, finished reading the legacy provision and looked up, her expression grave. "She's right," she announced to the room, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "This provision is integrated with the company's founding bylaws. It's legitimate. The trustee has absolute veto power over any merger." The impact of her words was immediate and devastating for Marcus. The board members, who just moments ago were his compliant audience, now looked at him with open suspicion. His carefully constructed reality was crumbling around him. "This is absurd," Marcus blustered, gesturing wildly. "A dusty, forgotten clause cannot stand in the way of progress. This is a multi-billion-dollar deal. It's what's best for the shareholders." Is it best for the shareholders, Marcus? James Reed spoke up, his calm, authoritative voice drawing all attention. Or is it best for you? Madison mentioned evidence. I think we, as a board, have a fiduciary duty to see it. Marcus's eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally, but he found none. His network of loyalists, the executives he had promoted, were now staring at their hands, avoiding his gaze. Their loyalty was to power, and they could sense it shifting away from him. I won't stand here and be subjected to this character assassination, he declared, grabbing his own briefcase. This meeting is adjourned. This meeting is not adjourned, I said, my voice like steel. You may be the CEO, Marcus, but you are not the owner. I am invoking my right as trustee to call an emergency shareholder session, and my first motion is to see the evidence of your deal. His desperate attempt to regain control had failed. He was trapped. With a look of pure hatred directed at me, he sank back into his chair, defeated. The next hour was a systematic dismantling of his entire scheme. I distributed the files from my briefcase, providing each board member with a neat, undeniable summary of Marcus's treachery. The room was silent except for the rustling of paper as they read through the evidence. They saw the emails detailing the planned layoffs. They saw the financial analysis that showed how Marcus's personal bonus was tied to the number of assets he could help Axion liquidate. And they saw the undeniable proof of the offshore account, the smoking gun. One of the directors, a man who had been one of Marcus's most vocal supporters, looked up from the papers, his face pale. Marcus, is this true? The R&D division, my son works there. Marcus didn't answer. He just stared at the polished surface of the table, a man hollowed out by his own greed. But the final nail in his coffin was yet to come. While the board was absorbing the financial betrayal, I introduced my final piece of evidence. Through my father's old contacts, I had found another victim of Marcus's ambition, the CEO of a smaller company he had consulted for a decade prior. The story was eerily similar. A promised partnership that turned into a hostile asset-stripping operation, leaving the company bankrupt and hundreds jobless. I played a pre-recorded video call on the main screen. The face of a weary, gray-haired man appeared. Marcus Thorne is a corporate sociopath, the man said, his voice heavy with the memory of his loss. He finds companies with strong legacies and good people, and he hollows them out from the inside. He did it to me, and he's doing it to you. Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't trust him. The testimony was irrefutable. It established a pattern of behavior that was impossible to dismiss. The spell was broken. Any lingering loyalty or doubt in the room vanished, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. Marcus was not just a bad leader, he was a predator. He tried to fight back one last time, attempting to defend himself. This is a conspiracy. She's twisted everything. That man is a failed CEO looking for someone to blame. But his words were empty, his protests pathetic. He was like a cornered animal, lashing out with no real strength behind it. The evidence was too overwhelming, the proof too absolute. The man who had commanded this room with such charismatic authority was now revealed for what he truly was, a common thief in an expensive suit. The board looked at him not with anger, but with a kind of weary disgust. The show was over. The air in the boardroom was thick with the silence of a verdict already reached. The shocked and angry faces of the directors were all the confirmation I needed. Marcus Thorne's reign was over. Now, it was time to make it official. I stood tall, my hands resting on the back of the empty chair beside James. I was no longer an outsider who had crashed the meeting. I was the one in command. Board members, I began, my voice steady and clear, resonating in the silent room. You have seen the evidence. You have heard the testimony. Marcus Thorne has not acted in the best interest of this company or its shareholders. He has acted only for himself. He has attempted to sell the legacy my father built, a legacy of innovation and integrity, for his own personal gain. He has betrayed our employees, our partners, and every single person in this room. I let the words hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final blow. Therefore, Under the authority granted to me by the Robert Vance Family Trust and the legacy provision in our company bylaws, I am formally vetoing the proposed merger with Axion Corporation. The deal is dead. A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the room. The disastrous merger was officially off the table. But I wasn't finished. Furthermore, I continued, turning my gaze directly to Marcus, who sat frozen in his chair at the head of the table, I believe we have another piece of business to attend to. The evidence of fraud, malfeasance, and gross negligence is irrefutable. It is clear that Mr. Thorne is no longer fit to lead this organization. I looked at James Reed. He nodded grimly. I second that, he said, his voice firm. I call for an immediate vote of no confidence in our Chief Executive Officer, Marcus Thorne. Panic flashed in Marcus's eyes. This was the ultimate humiliation, the public and undeniable rejection by the very people he had worked so hard to manipulate. You can't do this, he stammered, his voice a pathetic imitation of its former authority. I am the CEO of this company. Not for much longer, said another director, a woman who had been on the board for 15 years. She looked at him with utter contempt. All in favor of the motion to remove Marcus Thorne from the position of CEO, effective immediately. One by one, hands went up around the table. James Reed, the director whose son worked in R&D, the woman who just spoke, every single one. The vote was unanimous. It was a stunning, silent execution. There was no debate, no discussion. The judgment was swift and absolute. Marcus Thorne looked around the room, his face a mask of disbelief. He had been so certain of his victory, so confident in his power, that he couldn't comprehend his own downfall. He had seen himself as a king, and in the space of an hour, his kingdom had turned to dust. Helen, the lawyer, began speaking in a low, professional tone. Mr. Thorne, given the board's resolution, your employment is terminated. Your access to all company systems is being revoked as we speak. Security will escort you from the premises to collect your personal belongings from your office. The irony was crushing. The same words he had used on me, the same humiliating process he had subjected me to, were now being turned back on him. The two stony-faced guards he had hired entered the room again, but this time they walked past me and stood on either side of his chair. Marcus finally seemed to realize it was over. A broken, empty look came over his face. He stood up slowly, a man suddenly stripped of his power, his title, and his tailored suit of arrogance. He was just a fraud who had been caught. He didn't look at anyone as the guards led him towards the door. But as he passed me, he stopped. He leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper only I could hear. You think you've won? You'll run this company into the ground, just like your sentimental old father would have. I met his gaze without flinching. No, Marcus, I replied, my voice calm and quiet. I'm going to rebuild it, and you're going to watch me do it from whatever country you choose to hide in when the SEC comes calling. The color drained from his face. He had been so focused on the loss of his job, he hadn't even considered the legal ramifications. With a final, hateful glare, he turned and was escorted. From the room, from the company, and from my life. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind him, and a profound silence filled the room. The Titan had fallen. In the aftermath of Marcus's spectacular exit, the boardroom, which had been a theater of conflict, became a council of war. The relief was palpable, but so was the uncertainty. We had averted a catastrophe, but the company was now rudderless. James Reed cleared his throat, bringing the room to order. Well, he said with considerable understatement, that leaves us with the rather immediate problem of who is going to run this company. All eyes turned to me. I hadn't thought that far ahead. My mission had been singular: stop Marcus, save the company. I hadn't considered what came next. I looked around the table at the faces of the board members. They were tired, shaken, but also hopeful. They were looking at me not just as the daughter of the founder, but as the leader who had just navigated them through a crisis. With the board's approval, James continued, a small smile playing on his lips, I would like to nominate Madison Vance as our interim chief executive officer. I believe there is no one more qualified or more dedicated to restoring the integrity of this company." The vote was, once again, unanimous. It was overwhelming, humbling, and more than a little terrifying. 20 minutes ago, I was unemployed and disgraced. Now, I was being asked to lead the very company that had cast me out. I accepted. I had to. It was not just an opportunity, it was a responsibility. My father had left me a legacy to protect, and I would not fail him. The days that followed were a blur of intense activity. We immediately opened a full internal investigation into Marcus's tenure, uncovering a web of deceit that was even more extensive than I had realized. The evidence was turned over to the authorities, and federal investigators soon began their own inquiry. Marcus's assets were frozen, and he was barred from leaving the country. His downfall was not just corporate, but legal and absolute. My first act as interim CEO was to hold a company-wide town hall meeting. I stood before our thousands of employees, not in the formal auditorium, but in the main atrium, on the same level as everyone else. I told them the truth, all of it. I explained the threat we had faced and the steps we were taking to correct the course. I told them that the era of valuing stock price over people was over. Vance Innovations was built on the belief that technology should serve humanity, I said, my voice echoing in the vast space. We are a company of builders, thinkers, and innovators. We are not just a line on a balance sheet. From this day forward, we will reinvest in our people, in our research, and in the core principles my father established. The applause was thunderous. It wasn't just for me. It was for the company they believed in, the company they had feared was lost forever. The fear and uncertainty that had plagued the halls for months finally began to dissipate, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. We canceled the superficial, high-cost projects Marcus had initiated and immediately restored funding to the long-term R&D programs he had cut. We rehired several of the talented executives he had forced out. We rebuilt the foundations he had tried to demolish. A month later, James and I stood in my father's old office, now my office. I had kept his old oak desk, a solid, unpretentious piece of furniture that stood in stark contrast to the sleek, empty vessel Marcus had used. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the blueprints for a new project on the wall. "He really knew what he was doing, you know," James said, looking at a framed photo of my father on the bookshelf. "That legacy provision. He was always 3 moves ahead." I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. "He trusted me," I said. "He knew that if the time ever came, I would know what to do." The fight had been the hardest of my life, but it had led me back to where I was always meant to be. I hadn't just saved the company, I had reclaimed my birthright. Looking out at the city skyline, I no longer felt the sting of betrayal or the panic of that terrible morning. I felt a sense of calm, of rightness. I was Robert Vance's daughter, and I was finally home, ready to lead his legacy into the future.